Fitness Movement is brought to you by ZOAR Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all one place, ZOARFitness.com. Well, welcome everyone to our Halloween episode.
Ooh.
Sorry, I missed my cue.
Because today we're going to be talking about skeletons, training skeletons, that is. So I guess, first of all, do you guys call them skeletons?
Yeah.
I just
call
say
it a template?
but
Template.
Yeah, that's what
Template,
I
not
like
template.
skeletons. Template.
So I always used to call them templates, and not that that's wrong. It's just that I think sometimes people get confused with it being a templated program because you say you're using a template. So I just switched to skeleton.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because we're going to be talking individual design training. So it's like it's essentially like the outline of the week, what you'd be seeing on the back end as you go to program design for athletes, and it's basically like the big priorities or concepts or progressions that would be in play for the athlete. And then you're using that and you're essentially taking that skeleton and putting the meat on it. So yeah, it's the stripped down, no meat on the bone version.
We're the meat builders.
We're the meat builders. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So really quickly, let's talk through maybe considerations for a skeleton, and then we're going to go through some examples, real athletes of ours that we will kind of walk through the skeleton, why that coach laid it out the way they did. And we'll go through 3 different examples, one for each of our coaches. So first of all, what big picture considerations do you need to think about while you're creating a skeleton? If you're sitting in front of a blank cells, Monday through Saturday of a training week, what do you need to put in there?
I think that's where most of like information where you get through conversation with the athlete comes from. How long have they been training? How much can they afford to train per week? What does their lifestyle, work-life balance look like? How many times a week do they normally train? Background information, age, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I kind of start with I try to be pretty systematic about it. So like the first thing is like, well, what are their goals? So it's like, okay, these are the things you want to accomplish. All right, those are going to have to be in the programming from week to week, right? If I want to get better at bar muscle ups and I don't put bar muscle ups in your weekly skeleton, I'm kind of doing you a disservice there, right? So what are your goals? That's the first thing. Then the next thing, like Dave said, is like, okay, well, what's your schedule? Okay. And that could be, what days do you train? What days are you looking to train? How long are you looking to train? What time of day are you looking to train? How often per day are you looking to train? So, right, because again, you could have a goal and there could be progressions for that. But if you only have an hour and you want to get better at squat cleans, and I give you skills, drills, and strength progressions for squat cleans that you want to get better at clean and jerks, and I give you an hour's worth of squat cleans, we're not going to get to the jerks that day. So I have to be cognizant of your time constraints. So that would be the second thing, would be their schedule. And then based off the goals and the schedule, I start to outline where the priority items are going to go, like on those priority days. And then from there, I start to fill in either the accessory stuff to those goals or the ancillary stuff that's like, hey, we're going to want to maintain these things as we go through, right? So if I have an athlete who's a CrossFit athlete who maybe struggles with certain gymnastics movements, let's say, right? I'm not going to throw out all the weightlifting just because they're good at it, right? Because if you just don't do any snatching for 8 weeks, you're probably not going to be in a position to snatch well at the end of 8 weeks, right? So it's like, all right, I need to at least touch on the snatch to maintain that skill. So that's kind of how I think about going through and creating a skeleton.
Yeah, totally agree with everything you guys said. The only thing that I would maybe add to that, and it's not that Chris doesn't do this, he probably just didn't think about it, was like looking at their calendar for their year. So like,
yeah,
you're finding the place where they're at now, and evaluating like what things they want to work on now. But it's like, how do you get them from A to B to Z sort of thing, where it's like you also need that long-term picture in mind. Like, okay, I know you're going to compete in 8 weeks from now. I know you're going to compete in open quarterfinals, the CrossFit season come springtime. So it's like, okay, we maybe have like 2 peaks throughout the year, and then that's when it's like, okay, then it means that on the tail end of coming off of each one of those competitions, okay, we deload for a week to 2, then it's like, okay, now we have 8 to 12 weeks of limiter based work where we can let those skills that you are already proficient in and good relative to your competitive field, we can let those slide a little bit as long as we actually like, drive the needle forward on the things that are historically most challenging to move in the correct direction for you. Um, and like each one of us will maybe have well, we selected them this way. An athlete, our example will be like Chris's athlete will be like more gymnastics, body weight, movement limited athlete. Days will be more conditioning, repeatability, stamina based, and then mine's gonna be strength based. Um, and that is also obviously one of the things that you're going to consider. One more thing that we kind of briefly just discussed that we would actually bring it up on the call was having a 1 versus a 2 week skeleton. And it sounds like all of us use majority of the time a 1 week skeleton. What are like the circumstances where you might not?
So I'll go first then. So for me, circumstances where I might not, I'm going to keep it within the context of of like someone who has athletic endeavors, right? Like you could really easily do an AB week with maybe someone who's just looking to do some bodybuilding style stuff. But like, I'm going to put that to the side for now.
I feel like those people
So
are even more linear in my experience.
yeah, they can be. But I've used an AB week for like people who are like super new, just to because it's like I can set you up with a progression, like a 12-week workout, and like really easily just say, hey, you're doing 3 sets of this exercise every week or every other week,
Mm.
and every time you see it, you're going to use the same weight and try to push the rep range. So if you did 8 the first time you see it, try to do 10 the next time, try to do 12 the next time, and then
You
when
can
you can do
extend the
12,
progressions a lot further if it's bi-weekly.
way further,
So you could like
way
run it for
further
like
out.
24 weeks of like an A and B week, and it's only,
Yeah,
12 weeks of one progression. Where if you did that 12 continuous weeks, the person would be so sick of, you know,
yes.
bicep curls by the time they got to, well, they probably wouldn't be sick of bicep curls, but they'd be so sick of
I'm
their
never sick
Yeah,
of
not
bicep
not
curls.
bicep curls.
goblet
No.
squats that they
Yeah.
just want to vomit. Whereas if it's every other week that you come back to it, they still learn it and you can run the progressions really long. Is that what
Yes.
you're
And
getting
those
at?
exactly. And those progressions can be super linear, like you said. Like, all
Yeah.
right, hey, week 1, find a weight you can lift for 8 reps, and I'll give them a rep range. And then every week, just try to do more reps at that weight. And then when you can do the highest rep range at that weight with perfect form, now you add weight until you're back at the 8. So you could for a beginner, you can cycle through that for weeks and get good results. So I said I wasn't going to talk about that, but we did anyway. So thanks for that, Ben.
Well,
Um,
actually, I learned something. That was a good
there you
idea.
go.
Yeah.
No, then I was gonna say, so like for a CrossFit athlete, I feel like more often than not, an AB week or having some skills that are on an AB week tend to apply for me 2 different people. One is a skill that's a maintenance skill. So like for example, if I have an athlete who's needs to work on gymnastics and I want to work on a specific gymnastics skill, I'm probably going to want to touch on that every week. And let's say they're a really good squatter, you know what I mean? Maybe I alternate weeks, 1 week's a front squat, 1 week's a back squat, but we're only squatting 1 day a week, right? Because they don't need to be squatting more than that. So that's one way to do it. Another way is sometimes like with really high level CrossFit athletes, because it's like, A, there's so many skills you have to touch on, and B, you can make progress in skills for athletes that are super high level with almost less touches, right? Like because they're athletic enough to retain, especially with gymnastics, they're able to retain those small nuanced skills way quicker than like an intermediate athlete that's like, if I don't touch on this every week, it goes away. So I would say those are kind of 2 for me.
Yeah, interesting. I oftentimes if I have the case that you just mentioned of like we don't need to touch on this every week, but we at least we need to be touching on it like every other week, I'll
Mm-hmm.
usually put in like odd and even on the skeleton. So that way I know I'm like alternating weeks of like we'll do that in class quite frequently too. It's like, okay, we'll snatch on this week, clean jerk on this week. And you just
Yeah.
flip-flop between those two. And I've done that with athletes for just recently I've done that for probably 2 or 3 athletes for battery progression. So it's like the one week they're hitting clean jerks, the next week they're hitting snatches variations. So yeah, I agree. I will often use a biweekly template for higher level CrossFit athletes as they get closer to the season. And we just want to touch on more things.
Yeah.
Whereas off season, if it's more calculated and just a little bit less moving pieces in the program because things are a little bit more controlled, and I'm really trying to improve, physiology of like one specific or, a pretty narrow quality, then I want to make sure that we're actually improving that thing. And the best way to do that is just touch on it pretty frequently, like every week. So, yeah, I find that works well. And then the only thing that I'll add for like the biweekly skeleton that I really like is that I I do this, and I think you two are normally in the same boat where it's like most of the time I'm writing 1 week of training at a time for an athlete. Um, and if I have a biweekly template that allows me to have an entire week of feedback from the week prior, even if I go on a Tuesday and it's beginning of the week, I have an entire week beforehand to then build out the following week, the week after the one that they're currently doing. So I look at the B week results, the entire B week results to write the next B week because they're currently doing the A week.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm very similar to you where I like to do it to get more touches on different movements. But one thing I also do too is if we're trying to work on a movement where frequency tends to cause some nagging pain or anything like that, I like to put it on alternating weeks. So we're still touching it at an appropriate like frequency where it's not getting lost in the mix, but not causing those nagging pains. So if someone has like elbow issues every
I was
time
gonna
they
say,
do
is that
their
like,
muscle
are you
ups.
referring to like bring muscle up like a rope climb or?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then progress it through that way. And we could keep it a little longer in their program. And hopefully navigate those issues that they may feel along with like, prehabby and then I'll include like prehabby type exercises like every week and all that so that we address it that way.
Yeah, that's a good point, Day, because it's like that can get really tricky. And I feel like it's often where it's like, okay, I need to work on X skill to get better at my sport or specifically CrossFit. And it's like, but that's also the skill that gives me like joint pain. I feel like that's often the case, right? Because maybe your little muscle groups aren't super strong or you're compensating in certain ways to execute the skill.
Whose muscle
So
groups you
yeah,
calling little?
mine right now. Um, like for me, like when I was competing, I was squatting at least twice a week, and my knees would get cranky. But it's like I would train with people that would go 3 months without back squatting and still hit 95% of their max if they went and
I
hit a
hate you
single.
people. I hate
Yeah,
you.
oh, it was
Must
infuriating,
be
Ben.
nice.
Infuriating. But yeah, and then you have those nagging things that pop up. So I think that's really cool. That's a really good point there, Day.
Yeah. Why don't we let Chris go first? There's probably other things that we could mention within this, but I think a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of like how you'd slice it into your week, we've also kind of covered in our Priority Today podcast. I will link to it in the show notes if people want to check that out. It'd be a good like prequel to this episode. So Chris, give us a little background on the athlete and then walk us through what the skeleton was.
Yeah, so for this athlete, they came to me saying, "Hey, I want to work on certain gymnastic skills." So the ones they posed to me were specifically bar muscle ups, chest to bars, and rope climbs, and handstand walk. Sorry, 4 skills that this person was like, "I really need to work on these 4 skills." Um, she's relatively strong, so and a pretty good squatter, and so it's like, okay, I need to factor in these 4 skills and try to touch on them every single week. Unfortunately, 3 of those skills are all upper body pulling based skills, so I kind of got to make sure they're separated and you're not doing them too close together, otherwise you're fatiguing the same muscle groups. Handstand walk is somewhat, in my opinion, one you could partner off of one of those because it's more like an upper body push stability type of upper body movement. And then I tried to then include, because she is a CrossFit athlete, some weightlifting around the sport and kind of touching on those things, maybe in certain areas of the lift that she might be deficient in. not deficient, but like not as good in. So like a great example is like she's even pointed out, for a clean and jerk, my clean is this, my jerk is this. But when I do both of them together, I have a really hard time hitting anywhere close to those numbers when they're standalone. So it's like, okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to work on a squat clean by itself or jerk by itself. I'm going to kind of work them in tandem. Um, and then her training schedule is Monday, Tuesday, off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I have to work around that. And then in addition to that, she's also a gym owner. So it's important to her. And I do think as a gym owner, this makes sense that she takes class. She tries to take class 1 to 2 times per week. And so I have to factor that in as well. Is that like when she sends me what the class schedule is, the days she would usually take it is every Thursday and then most Mondays. Is like, okay, how are you going to scale class based on what we have the rest of the week, or how am I going to move your priority stuff around the class to make sure we're still getting good touches that we want. So long-winded way to go about how I thought through the skeleton. And so what it boiled down to was our skeleton is Monday we work on bar muscle ups, and I throw in upper body pulling accessory work at the end of her session. And then in the middle, the meat between those two buns is her class strength and class conditioning works, because like I said, she tries to get into class most Mondays.
So is that like she's doing it before class, she takes class, and then does the accessories after class?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And again, right, we're working on gymnastics, but I feel that most times I should say, that you have someone who is deficient or has issues with gymnastics, right? Like doing some sort of, let's say, upper body pulling or upper body pushing, bodybuilding, and going heavy into accessory work, I find is always really good, because most people lack some of the strength in the angles to be good at gymnastics, right? So if I struggle with bar muscle ups, yes, there's a skill component to it. And I know based on the number of strict pull ups she can do, she's plenty strong enough to be good at that movement. But at the same time, it's like building more strength. Actually, I got this from you, Ben. Ben said, there's nothing wrong with building a strength surplus, right? No one ever went into a gymnastics like, man, I am just too strong to do all these bar muscle ups. So being able to integrate those in, making sure she's strong enough there and stays healthy, is super important. Tuesdays is where we kind of touch on some of her weightlifting. So right now I'm going through a progression where I'm doing 3 weeks of front squat and jerk and power cleans. And then the 4th week is doing a heavy single of a squat, clean, and jerk. So kind of separating the movements, but making sure I'm partnering that like a heavy squat motion into a jerk, as well as trying to emphasize the power through a power clean. And then every 4th week, I touch on the movement itself with a heavy single. We do handstand walk work, and then we do hinging and upper body pushing accessory work. So that's Tuesday. Wednesday's off. Thursday's class. Friday, we snatch and back squat. Friday's pretty full. So we snatch, we back squat, we rope climb, and we do chest to bars. Not ideal to have 2 skills in one day.
Yeah, but almost like, sorry,
no, go ahead.
It's almost like 2 and 2. Like
Yep.
they pair together nicely, right? Like
Yes.
if you can squat snatch heavy, you don't need to warm up again to squat. If you can rope climb, you don't really need to warm up to chest to bar.
Exactly. Plus, like the pulling angle on a rope climb is different than a chest to bar and bar muscle up, right? And so if I put the bar muscle up and the chest to bar on the same day, you could really fatigue that same pulling angle versus, okay, hey, like you said, my pulling muscles are warm from the rope climbs, but the angles are different, so they partner together better. And so that's Friday, and then Saturday we touch on some deadlifts. So in this section that I'm going through with her, I partnered it with some plyometric work. So she's doing deadlifts and box jumps for height. And then we hit some aerobic conditioning intervals with an emphasis on wall walks, alternating weeks. Here's an A-B week. I alternate between handstand push-ups and wall walks because she's gymnastically better at upper body pushing work than she is at pulling. And those are 2 skills you'll generally see in the sport. So I want to touch on those. And then shoulder accessory work and glute and hip accessory work, because she had a major hip surgery like a decade ago. So her hip can get cranky from time to time. So making sure I do accessory work for her hips and glutes is super important.
Yeah, nice. I think that's a good example of like an athlete who, you know, they have a lot of practical constraints. Like, I want to do class. You know, I have limited time to train. Like, it's a good realistic take for like what most people deal with. Like, it's very rare that someone's like, "Hey, here's my schedule. It's wide open. Do whatever you
Yeah.
want." Right. And I'm also 18 and don't have any joint irritation. I've never had an injury. Like, that's just not life. So it's like
No
most of the
stress in the
time,
world. Nothing
yeah.
to worry about.
Yep. No kids, no girlfriend, no
Can't
bills to
imagine.
pay. Yeah. Cool. Um yeah, Day, do you have any comments on Chris's outline? I'm trying to think if I have anything that
It
sticks out to me.
sucks.
Yeah, it sucks. No, I do think having, like you mentioned that she goes to class a few times a week, and I think that's an interesting approach because, like, I know I have a few athletes that do that as well, and I think that's a big thing with CrossFit athletes is a lot of them still want to be a part of the community and all that, and being able to be like as a coach understand that that's part of it and being able to work around it and make it work, and having that conversation of like, okay, maybe go in a little earlier and touch on this and do the class and then follow up with this and just being
Yeah.
able to include that in there. It could be challenging sometimes. I find, at least for me, because
Super.
like,
Yeah.
there's going to be some
I hate doing
interference,
it
like, well,
unless it's my gym.
yeah, exactly. Because what's going on, right? And so, like, sometimes I'm like, okay, like we have this progression for they need for body pressing strength. So I'm going to put that on Tuesdays. On Wednesdays, they will go to class. And then next thing you know, Wednesday, they're doing a heavy bench. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, crap.
Yeah.
No.
That's
So it gets kind of
inevitable. And
tricky.
I feel like as long as you have that conversation, like, hey, you are in charge of your training. Don't do anything stupid, right? Like
Yeah.
like oftentimes coaches aren't knowing it's two things, right? Either they don't know ahead of time, or it's like, hey, the day of, I kind of get it published and I figure out what my
Yeah.
programming is, or it's like, okay, it publishes on Sunday, but I'm not gonna wait until Sunday to do your program design. Like
Right.
I have a life, so it's like it's not realistic to expect the coach to modify everything all the time. So it's like you need to be able to pull an audible at times and figure out what's best for you. And okay, you did 75 chest to bars in class. How about you don't do strict pull-ups today? Like your
Yeah.
lats are
Yeah.
toasted.
Yeah. And I think Day hit it on the head, and actually you did too. Like, so the first part of that conversation for people who are like, I want to take class is, depending on the individual, I may or may not be willing to give a little, right? So like,
Right.
if I have a new client, like
Yeah, it's a good point.
if I have a new client and they're like, oh, I have to do class on this day, I'll usually start by giving on one day, and it's usually Saturday, partner workout Saturday, right? And it's like, all right, cool, you can do that. Just know, like,
Sorry, you
you
need to
might
do the
have,
name game.
yeah, like you might need to adjust some of these things. And then usually what happens is that person, if their goals are purely athletic, like I want to be the best CrossFit athlete I can, eventually they stop doing that, because eventually they realize that it's like, you know, beating Susan in this workout is really not helping me get to my goals. It's like, just because you beat the 45-year-old house mom doesn't make you better at the sport of CrossFit, right? And that's a conversation I'll have, is like, hey, all
I don't
right,
know.
I'm
Susan
willing.
throws down.
She does. Susan does throw down.
Yeah, it's usually with burpees and V-ups. Like, she crushes those. um, so it's like, okay, cool. But then there's also the conversation of like, if someone's like, no, like this is my life, then it's like, all right, well, then it's kind of got to be your life. And every once in a while, it's okay to take class to get into the environment of like a group, because that does help you push. I don't care what anyone says. Being a part of a group does help you push at times. But it has to be strategic. And then on the other end, to use this person as an example, she's a gym owner. And so like, she wants to be better at the sport, but not at the expense of her livelihood. And so it's like, for her community, if it's important for her as a business owner to take class once or twice a week, or that's all her schedule can allow her to do, like her space is pretty small. So if like she's coaching classes during the day and she's like, this is the hour I have to work out and it's during a class, and so like I can't go and do my thing on the side, then it's like, all right, I'll work around that. But that's part of the conversation. And again, with her, Ben, like, she writes the programming for her gym. So part of the first conversation I had with her was
That's
like,
a
I
much better
need you,
situation.
yeah, I was like, I need you to send me what the workouts are for Monday and Thursday by this day every single week. If I don't get it by this day, I'm not putting it into your program, and you're going to have to figure it out yourself. And she
Yep.
was like, okay, no problem. So I wouldn't do that if it was like, oh, I go to XYZ gym and we just get our programming from Mayhem. It's like, well, I have literally no idea what you're going to be doing. And there's a really high chance they're going to get hurt. Same thing, like I've done it for people at our gym. I approve all the programming for our gyms. So it's like, I have complete access to what the workouts are going to be. So if I don't have instant access to what the workouts are going to be at your gym, it's like pretty hard for me to say okay, because it's like there's a pretty good chance you're going to have some sort of injury pop up then.
Yeah. Cool. Day, go for it.
All right, sweet. So the athlete that I have up here, it's right before quarterfinals. Well, it's in quarterfinals season. And his big thing was he's a strong guy. I didn't really have to worry about that, especially lower body. He was a former rugby player. He needed some work on his Olympic lifting, but he had the strength for them. So it was just more touching up on the refinements and all that. There was a room for improvement there. But the main thing that we wanted to focus on was his conditioning. And that's both in both realms. Like he needed a good endurance foundation, as well as like for like lactic intervals and more high intensity stuff. So that was our main focus, and being able to compete in those metcons, and being able to sustain those efforts in repeated bouts. So with him, it was good to work with him. He was young. He did have a full-time job, but had was a very structured job where he had time to after work, and it was very routine. So there was not a lot of things popping up. And I know sometimes it's difficult with people who have kids, or let's say a personal trainer who sometimes has like sporadic things come up on their calendar and their schedule. So his was really nice. It was routine. Young guy, just graduated college, so there was not a lot, like there was no kids or those type of commitments. So the way I structured it with him, working Monday through Saturday with 2 lower intensity days, 2 to 3 high intensity days, and 1 moderate. With him, I noticed after a few weeks of working with him was that he tended, on high intensity days, his resting heart rate was shut up for the following like 2 to 3 days, and he didn't recover as fast. So keeping that in consideration, I would try to space out those high intensity days throughout the week. So if I were to give like a breakdown of his week, his Monday, that's where we would add in morning conditioning, and that's just zone 2, longer periods of time, anywhere from 30 to 70 minutes. And that was of his choice in terms of what he wanted to use. If he wanted to use a rower, bike, running, more like put on a podcast or listen to nature or do something and just, focus on breathing. That was the main thing. And that he was good with that, wasn't as taxing. And so the PM session, we did some strength work for the lower body, mainly deadlifts. His squats was his strong point. So we focused a little bit more on deadlifts. Some skill metcons, which was handstand walking and bar muscle up, handstand walking on this day. And then accessory was more flexion work for the core, GHD sit-ups, and rotator cuff work, since he tends to have a lot of rotator cuff issues. And so on that day, Monday, that was more of his high intensity day, since the heavy deadlifts and the metcon really work in for that. So on the following day, we did some easy skill work and Olympic lifting cleans, more on focusing on skill refinement on that. So it was more moderate that day. I'd call that more of a moderate training day. We added in some front squats on those cleans as well. Moderate, something to maintain his squat, but I was as a complex with his power cleans and all that. So, and his squat cleans. So that day was more moderate for him, and it was able to allow him to recover from the previous day. Then we got on Wednesday here, the upper body, it was more upper body pressing strength. We were working on bench press specifically, some lactic intervals with monostructural work, gymnastics, and weightlifting, and so barbell cycling and some accessory work for his psoas and medial elbow. So again, those accessory works I put at the end, that's very specific based on, you know, where someone is weak in, or if they're having any type of injury or nagging pains or anything like that. So that was more of a high intensity day. Then we moved on to Thursday, which is more, that's where his recovery was, one of his recovery days. And that's just more zone 2 work, more of like the recovery hours that we do with ZOAR, where we put in some zone 2 work, some core, some easy movements, carries, things like that. Adding some variety week to week just to, add variety. And I did that on Thursday just because the first we had high intensity, a moderate, another high. Usually by this time at the end of the week, there's a lot of volume accumulated. People get tired. I look at data. So resting heart rate tends to get high, HRV is low. So that's where I put in that recovery hour just to be like, hey, it's the end of the week. You're probably tired mentally, physically, you know, let's make it easy. Just go, just move, focus on that, try to get something out of it, like the zone 2 stuff, and go from there so that we can kind of relax the body a bit. Because on Friday rolls around, and this specific week that I'm looking at, it was another high intensity day. So we start off with Olympic lifting snatches. Obviously putting that first when he's nice and fresh in the session, and then following with a metcon that focused more on lower body endurance, since that was something that also he needed to work on. It was one of our things we noticed was that in most metcons I had like a high rep lower body work, whether it was like a hinging, like a lot of kettlebell swings, a lot of GHD sit-ups, a lot of Olympic lifting, barbell cycling. He'd tend to feel it in his back, or if it was a lot of squats, lunging, he would feel it as well, and some grip accessory. And then Saturday, try to keep that pretty easy. So I like to go from high, moderate, low usually. And so on Saturday, I do something called like a high performance recovery training day. And it's just something that starts off with some breath work, followed by mobility, some heart rate focus intervals with skill, some med ball slams, variations, and some type of erg. And it's in an interval style that keeps it at a zone 2 pace, followed by some something easy that's focused on like power, concentric power. So in this one, I would have like a few sets of concentric split squats. So kind of taking the eccentric part out just to focus on that, making it explosive and speedy. So it's not taxing on the system. It won't get them sore or anything like that, but it's focused on output. Followed by
Is that they're just
like
like
10 to
concentric biased, or is it like are you like starting in the bottom position?
Yeah, starting like at the bottom position on pins, right?
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
just exploding up. Exactly. And so I would do things like that with concentric split squats, pin presses, all that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then the end of that session, we would add in something like 10 to 15 minutes easy bike. So very focused on I try to put everything in that, where it's like that whole session was mobility, heart rate focused, intervals, power work, and ending it with some type of zone 2, easy zone 1, zone 2 work.
Yeah, you're kind of hitting everything, but not in a way that's like incredibly taxing.
Right. And it's just a way to end off the week. Sunday was off for him. So it was like, that was an easy way to end off. And it's more focused on like power, on output in general.
Yeah.
Sunday off, and then revamp back on Monday.
How often do you put a low day before like a rest day, recovery day?
I do it kind of often, just because I've noticed some people get pretty fried, and that's pretty fried at the end of the week. So I tend to do it at the end of the week, where people still want to train on Saturday, but they're so fried from the week prior, from work, from training. So I do something on Saturday that's low, and like not as much impact or anything like that, and then off on Sunday. So you get that full 2 rest, because I do like to put a high intensity on Monday.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody just does like throws one rest day in, and then it's like, all right, you're back to work. Which like sometimes just like
Right.
reality is like people need more than one day for something to recover.
Yeah. And I know one thing that is that I've read a lot, seen a lot, is that men tend to require more rest than women. So, and it's interesting because that's how it is with most athletes I work with. It's like the men require like a little bit more rest periods, rest days than the women do. And I don't know, I've looked into readings about it, and it's like there's different reasons why, speculations, but one is that men tend, like when they're given like an intensity, like, hey, do this at this intensity, they tend to actually
RPE
stick to
8.
it. Yeah, RPE 8, it's like they go for RPE 10 and they really push themselves that way. But then there's
Yeah.
also the hormonal response from women versus men that allow women to recover quicker. So
Mhm.
that's why, like, when you look at athletes who taper for a sport or something like that, the women tend to taper less than the men.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm convinced that I'm a woman.
I'm convinced that I'm a man. I need more recovery.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I feel like one more factor might be the fact that, like, men are just handling a little bit higher absolute loads, so it's a little bit more
Yeah.
wear and tear at times.
Right.
Or they're able to like just get more volume in a particular movement, and like CrossFit's a good example. Like, if you give a 10-minute AMRAP of thrusters and chest to bars, the average male in the population is just going to get a little bit higher total work and than female.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
can
I don't know if
potentially be a little bit more wear and tear.
yeah. And I don't know if you notice this at like your gym, but like if you have like the workout structured a certain way, and let's say you're not giving rest intervals, you're just saying, okay, you're going to complete 3 sets of 5 back squats, you know. And then I don't know if you notice this, but like when I would do group classes, the guys would always take way longer because they needed that rest because they're going like they're lifting way more absolute load and more relative load
You're saying
too.
strength work or
Yeah, strength work.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
they
if
would take longer to finish that block.
yeah, for example, feels like, you know, 5x5 squats, and we just didn't give them like any constraints, just like, hey, get through your 5x5. I mean, there might be some women who just get chatty and that's why they take forever, but generally I feel like the women would probably move through a lot quicker than the men. Like the
Right.
men would be like going every like 3 to 4 minutes, and the women would be going
Right.
like every 90 seconds. They just do their next set.
Yeah.
I think part of that too is just like maybe some of it could be cultural as well, where it's like guys, they often want to lift like really heavy.
Yeah.
Whereas like some of the women are like, I mean, and this is much less the case than it was 10 and 20 years ago, but it's like some
Mhm.
women are still just like, yeah, I don't really need to push the weights. I'm just like pretty comfortable. Like, I'll do my strength work, but it's not like my, blood vessels are ready to burst.
Yeah.
And I think some of that could be hormonal as well. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
cool. Yeah, I'll go through my athlete. Um, so this is a teen CrossFit athlete, a male, and like most male teen CrossFit athletes who are aging up into the individual division, they just need to put on strength and size. So no different here. And I guess even if I have had a teen athlete come to me and they're like, hey, I want to peak for, this year's, you know, teen CrossFit games or something. I probably would only take that so far, where like I'm just maybe a little bit more risk averse for a teen, just because they don't know what they don't know, and
Yeah.
they like I feel a bit of responsibility as like a you know a coaching and fitness professional to like uphold their health, frankly,
Yeah.
and like their long-term um physiology, even if they don't really care about it,
Yeah.
because at some point down the road they probably will. So I think for all my younger athletes I train, I try to prioritize the long term a little bit more, but not so much that the person becomes disengaged in what they're doing because they just don't enjoy their training. So it's like I said this to somebody else on a call, but this is related to a master's athlete actually. It's like you got to give like the addict a little bit of what they want, just give them a little hit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you have to be you're at the end of the day, you're responsible to making sure that they improve through program design. So you need to put safeguards in place to make sure that they're getting what they need, and also just enough of what they want that they keep coming back, and at least long enough until they trust you. And now you can say like, hey, you don't need this. Um, so all that to say is like, this person is still doing a lot of CrossFit. However, there's just some of the things that are oriented a little bit longer term, and there's going to be certain things that I'm only willing to push weights so aggressively, or and truly it's not that much different than regular program design, but I guess it is with like a little bit longer term view of like, in order to be competitive, you need to continue to push the strength over the long term, just because everybody needs to do that. But then also, like, we need to continue to put on strength and size. In order to do that, you also need to be just slightly below probably your max recoverable volume. So all those things being caveats, let's go through. Monday, I really like giving weightlifting positional work, or just weightlifting work in terms of like snatch and clean and jerk on Mondays, just because people are fresh, they're coming off a rest day for the most part. So it's like, when that's the case, joints usually feel pretty good, nervous system usually feels pretty good. So give them like a pretty strong dose of strength work on that day. So Monday, snatch positional work. And then afterwards, we'll do a Metcon with barbell cycling that's meant to be strength limited. Oftentimes, if I'm doing barbell cycling, it's more capacity based work if someone's already got the strength. But and generally, I'll also say that like I don't give a lot of strength limited Metcons for people who are strength limited. Like usually, it's like do your strength work, get a good dose of your strength work, and then once you're strong enough, we'll start to mix in heavier weights in your Metcons. This is one of the exceptions to that, just because you're going to have to handle those loads in Metcons coming up. So being aware of your capacity now that we're continuing to build strength is going to be helpful for you. And then some hamstring accessory that was more so or posterior accessory, including hamstring, that's more like hypertrophy based. So like things like RDLs, glute ham raises, hip extensions, swords and holds. So that's Monday. And then Wednesday would probably be the next day. If I skip over Tuesday, would be like the next day where he's getting like a stronger lower body dose again. Tuesday is more upper body related. There's still some metabolic work on that day, but it's something that's either going to be a little bit more hanging gymnastics or pressing based, or like burpees and ergs and things where even if you're getting that systemic work rate, it's not going to be necessarily eccentric on the lower body. Like rowing and air bike is not going to mess you up the same way that like hang squat cleans will. So Tuesday, he's been working on strict ring muscle up, so I gave him some of that, and then some hanging gymnastics and pressing work that's just like unfatigued sets of things. In this case, it was like strict and kipping, parallel handstand push-ups, bar muscle ups where he's catching as high as possible. And then often going into intervals that are like, or a Metcon that's like an erg and burpee power based thing. Because again, being a smaller athlete, ergs are going to be tough. And for this athlete, we identified as burpees also being one of his few bodyweight limited, a bodyweight movement that's limiting for him. And then some like hip flexor and core stuff, because that's probably the reason why that's limiting for him. I kind of alluded to that on Wednesday. I was squatting, and then actually put 2 Metcons in this day, which I very rarely do. It's usually like a Metcon and maybe some like erg-based conditioning or like intervals and a Metcon. This one is Metcon and Metcon, which is again pretty rare. But it's also because there's not a lot of conditioning in the rest of the week. So it was front and back squats, and then a Metcon that's involving rope climbs and barbell cycling. And that's barbell cycling that's like more of a lighter to moderate weight. And then another Metcon that's just like featuring an odd object of some kind. So a yoke, a sandbag, farmers, carries, dumbbells, kettlebells, that sort of thing. Thursdays is low day. And I also give a little bit of handstand skill work on that day that's unfatigued. Friday, back to weightlifting work. So power cleans and plyometrics, deadlifting. So that's much more focused on like posterior strength and power, as well as like time under tension for deadlift, because his Olympic lifts relative to power lifts, speed, strength speed versus absolute strength is pretty good. So continuing to build absolute strength and like the musculature to support that. So deadlifts, in other words. Some single leg work, either usually like a box step up, weighted box step up of some kind, or step over lunge of some kind. And then some accessories for core and upper. And then Saturday's the name game for him, which varies right now. It's like strict pulling and jerk work, squatting, and then the name game, whatever that is. So
Awesome. Was this, I don't know if you mentioned, is it off season, in season for him?
uh
Is he doing a sport outside
yeah.
of?
Yes, but not right now. Maybe a little bit of off-season stuff, but I don't even think he's got any off-season stuff right now. So it's very his commitment outside of this. So he's going to school. And when we were in the summer, he was doing a few double days just because like responsibilities are less and time's a lot more.
Mm.
But again, being strength limited, being that he's in school, I'd rather have him sleep and eat a lot and
Right.
continue to put on size and strength because you only need to train so much to do that. But not a lot of other responsibilities. From like sports or that sort of thing.
Yeah. And you mentioned, because you mentioned before, right? Like working with a young athlete, you got to be careful with that. Like you don't want them to specialize so early because they have so many like athletic qualities that you need to develop. Like, and that's what, I think is becoming more and more common is people are starting to like become very skilled in a sport and they lose the general athletic qualities they should have. And you see these athletes coming up, they're going to college to play tennis or whatever, and they're great at their sport, but you ask them to tumble and they can't tumble, right? They can't even do a simple tumble. They can't do a cartwheel. And those are like
Yeah.
athletic qualities that like generally for like adults, I'm not putting like tumbling in the warm up or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, if I have like just a working adult who I'm working with, like they just want to feel strong, be strong. They want to go work out in a gym. So they don't have like aspirations to become like some type of athlete, like CrossFit Games athlete or something like that. Some do. But for a younger athlete and like they need to have those things. They need to have the body awareness. They need to be able to do simple things like that, be exposed to all these areas, have relative body strength before they start benching with a barbell, doing heavy squats with a barbell. So
Yeah. And
not
even teen
neglecting
athletes
that.
vary a lot in terms of
Yeah.
like the exposures they've had to like traditional strength conditioning where they've abided by sound principles for a while and now they're engaging in something like CrossFit versus someone who didn't have that background. They just jump right into CrossFit. Um, their compensations are just going to be a little bit different. Typically
Yeah.
someone who's learned how to hinge squat press pull in the bro sesh way is gonna, there's maybe gonna be other things that they struggle with, maybe like body awareness or you know, uh, rotational power or something, right? But it's like at least they know how to move pretty effectively without just like thinking of reps as, getting as many as you can at least amount of time.
Yeah.
Like there's always gonna be weird compensations that come up when you race exercise from CrossFit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, like part of it too is like the things that keep an athlete healthy, I think, can also be the things that keep them engaged in their training. Like,
Mhm.
learning to do new skills or, practicing your same skills that you have, but maybe in a slightly different way. For example, in this week, I gave him rising ring muscle ups, which is never something I don't give athletes a lot. I don't practice that much, but it's like a little tweak of like a movement, right? Where it's like just enough where it's like it's a new way to think about it and try it out. I'll give like as I said, like handstand skill work. So it was like on this day it was, handstand walking to a wall, freestanding handstand push-up practice, static holds on parallettes, things like that, right? Where it's like, all right, obviously that needs to be tailored to the level of athlete to a degree, but the more exposures you have of just like variance, with it being like within reason, where it's like the person has a lot of the prerequisites they need to learn the new thing, but it's like close enough where they can like enjoy it and feel engaged. I think is all helpful for developing other athletic qualities, but then also just like enjoying your training.
Yeah.
Like if you early in my career as a coach, I was very much of the mindset of like, these are the 20 movements that are coming up in the open. You want to get to, the next level. In that case, it was like regionals. It was like, okay, if you want to go from the open to regionals, you have to be really good at the open. Nothing else matters in terms of like movement selection. So you're not going to run, you're not going to air bike, you're not going to do, dumbbell movements before like 2017 or whatever they came out. It's like, you're just going to do this stuff and you're going to get really good at it, which I think to a degree is good. But then also it's like, as soon as you level up your game, you now have these like huge holes that you need to fill, where it's like, you never really regret working on skills that are slightly outside of like the scope of what you're asked to do like right now.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Cause like that, I think that's what CrossFit does right with like youth training is like the variety is great. All the different skills that you have to acquire, like there's a lot of playtime of
Yeah.
learning these skills, and that's great for an athlete. Like they need that. That's like that's what you want kids to do growing up when they're playing outside and all that. It's like they're running, they're sprinting, and like they're acquiring all these athletic general skills um, without the thought of them actually like being on a structured program, you know? So I
Yeah.
think they do that right. And you mentioned it like, yeah, if you, like you said, like you focus on quarterfinals and then you worry about the skills after. But if you're working all these different qualities, like those skills may even come naturally. Like I have one athlete, just, she's a freak. Like she's awesome. You could ask her to do anything and she'll do it. And we were warming up the other day and not the other day, I think it was like last year actually. Same thing. Um, but we were talking about handstand walking and she's an endurance athlete. And she's like, I've never handstand walked before. And she
Oh
just like
gosh.
goes on her hands and just starts walking on them, like just handstand walks like effortlessly. And I'm like, she has years of just, I think she did gymnastics when she was young for like a few years. Like, she has really great genetics too. So that helps. But, you know, that didn't take long. Meanwhile, me, I didn't have a athletic background. That took me like a year and a half to learn. And that was like
Yeah.
3 to 4 days a week focusing on handstand walking.
Yeah.
So
Unfortunately, not a
yeah.
level playing field. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is like, if you got a young person and they're doing CrossFit, it's like, as long as you put some either intelligent program design in place or just like, not even like a super qualified set of eyes, just like a set of eyes there that are like kind of like, hey, maybe that looks like that isn't gonna be super great if you do that for the next 10 years. Like that bar muscle up, you chicken winged it pretty bad. Like if you do that 20 times in this workout for the next 5 years, you're gonna be in a bad place at some point. It's like,
Yeah.
if you can just do that, like, hey, you're clearly moving poorly.
Mhm.
Let's work on that, right? And not when you're super tired. It's like you're gonna just avoid so much. Where it's like, I feel like the only time where, and this is where like it probably happens too much, and that's why in some cases like CrossFit will get a bad rap for like, just general training, but also youth training. It's like where someone has like really obvious compensations, and then because they're so tired in the workout, they just continue to reinforce the same thing again and again. It's like, you know, the way you're moving is you're getting the work done, but at the complete cost of like your long-term
Yeah.
longevity.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely see that a lot in local comps. It's a
Yeah, the local comp
scary
scene is
thing.
the perfect example of that,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And
unfortunately.
it's scary. I think that's where a good coaching comes in, or just an extra set of eyes.
Yeah. Or somebody to be objective with themselves. And it's like, again, as a adult, when there's a kid in the room, it's like, okay, that's your responsibility. At a certain point, though, it becomes the athlete's responsibility. Like you're old enough to understand that if you do this, you're gonna get hurt doing it. Like if you choose
Yeah.
to, continue to overhead squat and you don't ever work on your overhead mobility and your T spine's locked in place because you have a desk job that you sit at for 60 hours a week, you're gonna get hurt at some point, right? And if you
Yeah.
understand that and you're willing to for those consequences, okay, go for it. But just know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I totally agree. I think,
Skeletons, right?
yeah. Oh yeah, we were supposed to talk about skeletons.
Hey, we did get through our
Ooh.
3 examples. So yeah, I mean, if
Yes.
people got questions, they got follow-up stuff, or if they want us to talk about, maybe we'll revisit like masters and youth,
Yeah.
some specific demographics. But yeah, let us know if you got questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Sweet. Thanks, Dave.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.